Good morning, this is Ms. Finnegan, and we're going to be looking at problems 42 through 45 in the Semester 2 Final Exam Review. And what we're doing here is we are factoring polynomials. More specifically, we're factoring quadratics. So you know you have a quadratic that you're going to factor this way because you have an x squared, an x term, and then a constant term. If you just had the first two terms, an x squared and an x, you could factor out a common factor. But since we have a constant, we're going to have to factor it a little bit differently. Ultimately, what we're looking for is we're looking for the numbers that will multiply to give us negative 24, but add together to give us negative 5. So what you can do, if you need to, is over here list out the numbers that multiply to give you negative 24. And so that would be 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. And since it's a negative, one of those numbers in each pair have to be negative, the other has to be positive. Now we want to see which ones combine together to give us a negative 5. The only one where that's possible is going to be 3 and 8. To get a negative 5, it has to be 3 minus 8. So since our coefficient is 1 up front, then those are the factors, the numbers that are going to go inside our factors. So it would be x plus 3 and x minus 8. So on 43, we're going to do the same thing, the numbers that multiply to give us negative 30 and add to give us negative 13. So just at offhand, I'm thinking 2 and a negative 15. But I want to show you another way to do it that is... So what we're going to do, what you can do for any quadratic, whether you have a coefficient of 1 or not, is you can multiply the first term and the last term together, which would give us negative 30x squared. If I had a different coefficient in front of x squared, that would make the number bigger. And so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to list out the factors of this, so just like we did last time, but now I just have an x squared with it. So I have 1x and 30x, 2x and 15x, 3x and 10x, and then 5x and 6x. And since 30 is negative, that means one of my two factors in my pairs has to be negative. So if we want to get a negative 13, I notice there's two ways I could possibly do it. 3 and 10 would give me 13, but only if I'm adding them if they're both the same sign. Since one of them has to be positive and negative, 10 minus 3 is 7, so that's not going to work. Okay, so my other option then is 15 and 2. In order to get the negative 13, it has to be 2 minus 15. Okay, so once I've written out my factors and decided which ones I'm going to use, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to replace this middle term with my two factors. And it seems like an extra step at this level, but it's going to really help out when we get to coefficients that are different. But it helps you see it now. So what I do is I split apart negative 13 into my two factors because 2 minus 15 is negative 13. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to group the first two terms together and I'm going to take out the common factor between them. So x squared and 2x has an x in common, so that leaves x plus 2. And then if I look at negative 15x and minus 30, they both have a negative 15. And so if I remove a negative 15 from each term, I'm going to have an x plus 2. Hopefully, if you've done your math correctly, then you're going to see that the parentheses are identical. So that becomes a common factor now. So that comes out front. And whatever is left over is my second factor. So like I said at the beginning, I had predicted 2 and 15 would be my factors. Going through this mathematical process, I can see I get x plus 2 and x minus 15. We're going to use this process now because it works for any quadratic where you have the three terms, especially when you have a coefficient up front. So here I have 3x squared minus 10x minus 8. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the first two terms, or the first term and the last term. So 3x squared times negative 8 is going to give me negative 24x squared. So I'm going to list out my factors, 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. And again, 24 is negative, so one of my factors has to be negative, one has to be positive. So there, again, I'm seeing that there's two possible ways to get 10. 2 and 12 could give me 10 if they subtract. 4 and 6 would give me 10 if they add. But remember, one number has to be positive and negative, so there's no way for 4 and 6 to subtract to give me 10. I can only use 2 and 12. And to get a negative 10, it has to be 2 minus 12. All right, so now I'm going to come back over to my equation, and I'm going to split apart the negative 10x. So I'm going to rewrite my quadratic as 3x squared, and then I'm going to replace the negative 10x with 2x minus 12x. So I have plus 2x minus 12x minus 8. So again, 2x minus 12x is 10x. So it's the same quadratic, it just looks a little different. Now I'm going to group together the first two terms and the second two terms, the third and fourth term together. So 3x squared plus 2x has an x in common, and I'm going to have left over 3x plus 2. And over here, negative 12x minus 8, I have a negative 4 in common, so if I divide each term by negative 4, I have 3x plus 2. Again, our goal is to have the parentheses identical, which I do, so that set of parentheses is going to come out front as a common factor, so 3x plus 2, and then I have an x minus 4 left over, so that goes inside my second set of parentheses. Alright, so let's do it one more time on the last problem, number 45. I have 8x squared plus 6x minus 9. So I'm going to multiply my first term and my last term, which is going to give me a negative 72x squared. So there's going to be a lot of factors here. So 1x and 72x, 2x and 36, 3 and 24, 4 and 18. There's nothing for 5, 6 and 12, and then finally 8 and 9. Okay, again, it's a negative 72, so that means one of my factors has to be negative, the other has to be positive. So our number needs to be a positive 6x. The only way I could even get 6 would be to use 6 and 12, where 12 is positive and 6 is negative. So 12 minus 6 gives me a positive 6. All right, so now we're going to split apart that middle term. So I'm going to rewrite my quadratic, but instead of 6x, I'm going to put minus 6x plus 12x, because that would give me the positive 6x, and then minus 9. Now I'm going to group together, and I'm going to factor out the common factor. So 8x squared minus 6x has a 2x in common, and so then I'm going to have a 4x minus 3 left over. Second group, 12x minus 9. They're not, 12x isn't negative, so I don't want to take out a negative sign, but they both are divisible by 3, so I'm going to take out a positive 3, which gives me 4x minus 3 left over. My parentheses match, so 4x minus 3, and then 2x plus 3 goes in my second parentheses, and that is my final answer. So hopefully, if you haven't already known how to do this, you maybe have learned a new way to do it. Multiply the first and last term together, write out your factors, find the two factors that combine to give you the middle term, and if you have a coefficient, then I really recommend following this mathematical process that we used on 44 and 45 to help you get to your final answer. Good luck on your final.